you can then start to own those things and take them back, rather than completely trying to propel them from your borders all the time. And, you know, like cannons on the side of a ship in the old days. You don't. You make contact with them and you go into them. So there's an acknowledgement that darkness out there, the unpleasantness, isn't necessarily separate from us in any real way. It's actually part of us, and it emanates from us. So we can recall that back into us and say, okay, darkness, where did you come from? What occurred where I created that darkness and then tried to disown it? What occurred there? And that is a process of looking within, and it is a process of understanding that fundamentally, when you ignore an opportunity for growth, or when you have a negative emotion and you ignore it, that you are creating a darkness, you are creating a void. That void eventually becomes more and more hard and dense and will come and bite you in the backside sooner or later. So when those things start to occur, and when you do realize there are shadows in your life that are kind of like creating trouble for you, the thing to do is go right into the center of them, is to go right up to them and to begin to assimilate that back into yourself in a completely open and conscious and powerful, but also compassionate way, and say, I'm going to own this darkness, and I am going to own it for as long as necessary until I can completely diminish it, until I can shine my consciousness into it, and it just naturally dissolves.
Neil, we're actually coming up to our next break, so
sure.
I'll give you the chance to finish this off just after we've had this short break. It's Peter Tung for Awakening to Conscious Co-Creation.
Taking you to the threshold of a dream and beyond. Seventh Wave Network.
Do you want to reach your highest potential in your personal and business life? Come and join our heart-centered community with Peter Tung and Sherry Chase. Embrace love, abundance, integrity, and personal empowerment in a safe and sacred space for your awakening. Our intention is to lay the groundwork for you to advance your awareness sufficiently to be fully involved in the conscious co-creation of peace and prosperity on our beautiful planet. Go to myheartcenteredjourney.com for more information.
Listening on a higher dimension. Seventh Wave Network.
You're listening to Awakening to Conscious Co-Creation with Peter Tung. If you have a question for Peter or comment on this series, please send an email to descendingdove@gmail.com. That's descendingdove@gmail.com. Now back to our program.
Welcome back to Awakening to Conscious Co-Creation with your host, Peter Tung. Just want to remind you of this wonderful opportunity that we've been given to go to Egypt in the second half of February with Finbar Ross, and I will be co-leading that tour, going to some of the most significant sites in Egypt, understanding historically what took place and doing some meditations and insights and connecting to those other realms to help us on our unfolding journey. If you wish to check that out, www.celticmysticaljourneys.com. And you can see all the trips that Finbar has organized, and specifically the one in February 2012, that I will be accompanying him on. And just before the break, Neil, you were talking about really facing up to that shadow side and getting inside it. Just finish that piece off.
Sure. Fundamentally, what the principle of this is that we create our own experiences at root. It doesn't necessarily happen as conscious, three-dimensional human beings, Homo sapien entities. It happens at a slightly different level. So we don't always have knowledge, certainly not foreknowledge of that process. But most of what we have is kind of pre-ordered, if you like. Most of the circumstances we find ourselves in are pre-ordered. And so when you begin to develop that communication with your higher self, your fifth dimensional self, shall we say, then you begin to see that, and you begin to switch your faith in that process to a knowing in that process. So personally, from my point of view, which is obviously all I can ever really talk from, I can say that I have a knowing that my higher self, which is a bit of a misnomer, but we'll say that because it's hard to talk about otherwise, my higher self is saying, okay, these things are going to give you exactly what you need, and try not to push anything away. Try not to give in to fear. And in my personal experience, it's meant that I have started to realize that most of the sort of unpleasant things that occur, certainly in terms of human behavior being the most extreme examples usually, I can begin to observe that without judgment now. And I begin to understand that what society calls evil, when we see those things, what we're actually seeing are the effects of someone who is attempting to mitigate their own pain, the effects of their own pain. And so they push out more pain to displace it. And we all do this a little bit from time to time, but some people get caught in that cycle. And so the most important thing is to understand that you create the pain. And once you realize that, something happens, the penny drops, and you think, well, hang on a second, if I create the pain, that might be a bit of a surprise, but it means that I can control the pain, I can control the creation of that, and that is where the solution lies. And, you know, it's 2 days training to go into that, but that's the principle of it for the purposes of this conversation.
Absolutely. And how does the flow of the masculine and feminine energies come into this?
Well, masculine and feminine is a very physical representation of the teaching mechanism that this world uses, which is polarity, essentially. And I think that at a very fundamental level, you could say that when the world came into existence, the three-dimensional world, there was a decision, an intelligence, there was a divinity that decided that polarity is a damn good way of getting things to move along, is a really effective method of getting things to create themselves in such a way that there's never any stagnation, and that those things can continually create new forms and can continually unfold in a manner that is going to bring evolution, if you can imagine it in that way. So my understanding, and this goes back to many traditions, of course, is that this solar lunar principle, this male-female principle, this penis-vagina principle, in the very intimate sense, in terms of sexuality and one's experience with love and with creation and procreation, and in a very galactic sense in terms of creation and destruction and black holes and white holes and suns and moons and so on, it brings us to the realization that a lot of the Hermetic sages realized, which is that not only do those two things represent each other, not only is there a representation, but as was recorded in the so-called Emerald Tablet by Hermes Trismegistus, that they're actually completely and totally part of each other. They don't symbolize each other, they are part of each other. And so it's not just about archetypes, it's not just about roles that we attribute certain characteristics to with certain energies. They are actually part of the same thing. So the secret of a lot of the alchemical conscious movements, certainly in the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe, was that the alchemist would realize that in order to bring about majestic and pure and beneficial transformations in the world, completely relied on the alchemist's willingness to transform their own consciousness. Because when you do realize that you are connected intimately to the sun, when that energy begins to flow through you, it changes your consciousness forever. And it's a one-way process. And most people are a bit unsure of that, and so they never quite do it. They keep it as a symbolic relationship. but it's actually a very physical one, and it's a very literal one. And then again, we start to realize